Claire first noticed it on a Tuesday morning when she woke with tears on her face. The kind of tears that come from deep grief, from loss so profound it rewrites the architecture of your chest. She had been dreaming about her mother's funeral, standing in a small chapel with rain drumming steadily against stained glass windows, watching strangers in dark coats lower a casket into wet earth. The grief felt enormous, visceral, like something living inside her chest, something with teeth and claws that had taken up permanent residence. She could still smell the flowers, white lilies with their sickly sweet perfume that seemed to coat the inside of her throat, could still feel the rough texture of the tissue someone had pressed into her hand, could still see the grain of the wooden casket, dark and polished and utterly final. But her mother was alive. Her mother lived 3 states away in a small house with a garden she complained about constantly, and they had spoken on the phone just 2 days ago about nothing important, about weather and grocery stores and a neighbor's new dog that barked at all hours. Claire sat up in bed, her heart still heavy with a loss that had never happened, a mourning that had no object, and tried to shake the feeling away. It clung to her throughout the morning, through coffee that tasted like ash and breakfast she could not finish and the drive to work where she sat at red lights feeling like she had left something crucial behind, something she could never retrieve. The grief was a phantom limb, an amputation she could feel but not locate, and it followed her into the office, into meetings, into conversations where she heard herself speaking but could not quite connect the words to any intention. She called her mother during lunch just to hear her voice, just to confirm the reality that her mind seemed uncertain about, and her mother answered cheerfully, complaining about the price of tomatoes at the grocery store, utterly alive, utterly unconcerned with caskets or rain or the terrible weight of permanent absence. The relief Claire felt was profound but also strange, like being reunited with someone after years apart when it had only been 2 days, like finding something precious you did not know you had lost. That evening the grief had faded to something manageable, a dull ache she could almost ignore, but it never quite disappeared entirely. It sat somewhere inside her, waiting, patient, a sadness without a source, without a story, without permission to exist. The next dream came 3 nights later and it was different, quieter, more insidious in its ordinariness. She was sitting in a small apartment she had never seen before, sunlight slanting through Venetian blinds in that specific golden way that happens only in late afternoon, drinking coffee from a chipped blue mug that somehow felt more familiar than any object in her actual life. A man was there, someone she did not recognize, dark hair starting to gray at the temples, wearing a t-shirt with a faded logo, reading a newspaper at the kitchen table. He looked up and smiled at her, the kind of smile that happens between people who have known each other for years, comfortable and unremarkable and freighted with all the small accumulated intimacies of shared time. They talked about ordinary things, about calling a plumber because the shower was dripping again, about whether they needed milk from the store, about a movie they might see that weekend. The conversation felt worn in, familiar, like a path walked so many times the ground has been smoothed to nothing, the edges softened by repetition. She felt affection for him, deep and quiet, the kind that does not announce itself, that lives in gestures and glances and the comfortable silence between words. When he reached across the table and touched her hand, his fingers warm against her skin, she understood without words that they had been together for a long time, that this was their life, their routine, their small shared world built from accumulated mornings and evenings and the unremarkable dailiness that constitutes love. Then she woke up in her own bed, alone, in her own apartment, and did not know the man's name. She did not know where that kitchen had been or why the coffee mug was chipped or whether they had ever called the plumber about the dripping shower. The details scattered like birds when she reached for them, fragmenting, dissolving, refusing to cohere into anything she could hold. But the feeling of affection remained, warm and inexplicable, a tenderness for a stranger who did not exist, who had never existed, who was just her mind's invention. Except it did not feel like invention. It felt like memory. She carried it with her all day, a strange doubling of her attention. She went to work and answered emails and sat through a meeting about quarterly projections, watching pie charts and listening to someone drone about market penetration. But some part of her was still thinking about that kitchen, about the way morning light had looked coming through those blinds, about the weight of another person's love settling around her like a familiar coat. It felt more real than the meeting. More important than the spreadsheets on her screen. More true than anything happening in the conference room where she sat pretending to care about numbers that meant nothing to her. That night she lay awake for a long time, afraid and uncertain why, watching the ceiling and listening to the distant sound of traffic and wondering what was happening to her. She had always dreamed, everyone did, the mind processing the day, working through anxieties, spinning narratives from the raw material of experience. But these were different. They had weight, substance. They left marks like real experiences leave marks. changing her in ways dreams should not change a person. Over the following weeks the dreams continued. Not every night but often enough that she began to anticipate them with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Checking for them the way you might check for symptoms of an illness you suspect but cannot name. She dreamed she was pregnant, standing in a bathroom with early morning light coming through a frosted window, staring at a positive test in her hands. 2 pink lines that rewrote her future in an instant. She dreamed she was hiking through mountains, the air thin and cold, her legs burning with exertion, someone hiking beside her whose face she could never quite see, whose presence felt essential. She dreamed she was playing piano in a small recital hall, her fingers moving across keys with confidence she had never possessed in waking life. The music flowing through her like water, like something she had always known how to do, had always been capable of. Each dream felt complete, whole, not fragments or impressions but entire experiences lived from beginning to end, with their own internal logic, their own emotional coherence. And each one left something behind, an emotional residue that did not belong to her waking life, did not correspond to anything she had actually experienced. She would find herself missing the child she had never carried, feeling the absence like a phantom limb, a hollow space where something vital should be. She would crave the exhaustion of mountain air, the burn in her muscles from a climb she had never made, the particular satisfaction of physical exertion she had never known. Her fingers would itch to touch piano keys even though she had never learned to play, had never sat at a piano in her life, had no musical training whatsoever. The boundary between her life and these other lives was thinning, wearing away like fabric rubbed too many times in the same place, becoming translucent, permeable, unreliable. She started keeping a journal, writing down the dreams as soon as she woke, trying to map them, to understand the pattern, to find some logic or structure that would explain what was happening. But there was no pattern. The dreams were not sequential, they did not build on each other, they did not follow any narrative arc or developmental progression. They were simply different lives unfolding in parallel, each one independent, each one complete unto itself, each one as real and detailed and emotionally coherent as her waking life. In one dream she was a teacher, standing in front of a classroom full of children with upturned faces, explaining fractions with patient repetition, using apples and oranges as examples, watching comprehension dawn in their eyes. In another she was working in a bookstore, the smell of paper and dust everywhere, the particular quiet of a space devoted to reading, helping customers find obscure titles, making recommendations, running her fingers along spines of books she had somehow read despite never having seen them before. In another she was painting, her hands covered in acrylics, blues and greens and colors she could not name, staring at a canvas that was starting to resolve into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that justified the hours spent making it. She was living a dozen different versions of herself, and each version felt as real as the one that woke up each morning in her own bed, in her own life, going to her own job at a marketing firm where she wrote copy for products she did not care about, selling things to people who did not need them. The dreams began to change her, began to alter the trajectory of her waking life in small but accumulating ways. She found herself making different choices, small ones at first, barely noticeable. She bought a cookbook even though she rarely cooked, because in one dream she had been making soup from scratch, cutting vegetables with meditative focus, the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board hypnotic, and the memory of it made her want to try, made her think maybe she could bring some of that peace into this life. She started running in the mornings because in a dream she had felt the rhythm of her feet on pavement, the clean exhaustion of pushing her body, the particular clarity that comes with physical effort, and waking up she had missed it, had felt the absence of it like a gap in her routine. She signed up for a pottery class because in a dream her hands had shaped clay, had felt the cool wetness of it spinning under her palms, the satisfaction of making something three-dimensional and permanent, and the absence of that sensation felt like grief, like something stolen. She was trying to bring the dreams into her waking life, to make them continuous, to smooth the rupture between sleeping and waking, to prove that the two could coexist, could inform each other, could be part of a single coherent existence. But it did not work. The soup tasted wrong, not like the one in her dream, the flavors flat and disappointing. Running left her breathless and uncomfortable, nothing like the easy rhythm she remembered, her body refusing to cooperate with the memory of grace. The clay would not shape itself the way it had in sleep, would not respond to her hands the way dream clay had responded, remaining stubbornly inert, refusing her will. The dreams were not guides, not visions she could follow, not blueprints for a better life. They were separate, complete, unreachable, and trying to bridge the gap only made the distance more apparent, more painful. And every morning when she woke she felt the violence of the transition, the brutal severance from one life to another. It was not gentle, not gradual. It was instantaneous and total, like a door slamming, like a connection cut, like falling from one world into another with no preparation, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. She began to dread waking up. Not because her waking life was terrible. It was fine. It was perfectly adequate. She had a job and friends and an apartment and all the markers of a functional existence. But because waking felt like dying. Every morning she abandoned someone, left them mid-sentence, mid-breath, mid-thought. The teacher in the classroom, the painter in the studio, the woman in the kitchen with the man she loved, all of them abandoned, all of them erased, all of them replaced by this single waking version of herself who felt increasingly like a placeholder, a default setting, the life she returned to only because she had to, because the mechanism of waking demanded it. She started sleeping more, going to bed earlier, staying in bed later, taking naps whenever she could, calling in sick to work with increasing frequency, spending whole days in bed, cycling through dreams, through lives, through versions of herself that felt more substantial than the woman lying in the bed. Her friends noticed. They called, sent messages, asked if she was okay, if she needed anything, if something was wrong. She told them she was fine, just tired, just stressed, just needing some rest. They accepted this because people accept what you tell them when the truth would be too strange to process, when the actual explanation would require them to question the nature of reality itself. But she was not fine. She was fragmenting, splitting into pieces, living in too many directions at once, and the center was not holding. And the worst part was that she was starting to prefer it. The dreams were better than waking. Richer. Fuller. More meaningful. In her dreams she was necessary, she mattered. Her actions had weight and consequence. She was teaching children who needed her, creating art that meant something, loving people who loved her back with a depth and specificity her waking life had never contained. In her waking life she was just another person, replaceable, forgettable, moving through days that left no mark, that accumulated nothing, that meant nothing to anyone including herself. One night she dreamed she was old, sitting in a sunny room with photographs on the walls, black and white images of a life lived fully, completely, a whole architecture of memories and choices and accumulated time visible in the frozen moments captured in frames. She could feel the weight of all those years, the texture of a long life, the satisfaction of having been someone specific, having done specific things, having mattered in specific ways. Her hands in the dream were wrinkled, spotted with age, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold while she looked at the photographs and remembered. And then she woke up young again, alone again, in a life that had accumulated almost nothing, that felt thin and provisional, like a sketch of a life rather than the finished thing, like a rough draft that was never meant to be permanent. She lay there in the dark, understanding finally what was happening. The realization arriving not as a shock but as a confirmation of something she had already known on some level but had refused to acknowledge. The dreams were not imagination. They were not her mind playing with possibilities, were not creative exercises or wish fulfillment or the random firing of neurons. They were real, all of them, every single one. They were versions of her life that were continuing somewhere, somehow, in some dimension or reality or quantum state she did not understand, versions that did not stop when she woke, that kept going without her, that were as real and complete and ongoing as this waking life she kept returning to. Every time she fell asleep she stepped into another life, and every time she woke she abandoned it. But it kept going without her. The teacher kept teaching, the classes continued, the children learned or did not learn, the curriculum progressed. The painter kept painting, the canvas was finished or abandoned, the studio was cleaned or left in disarray. The woman in the kitchen kept drinking coffee with the man she loved, they called the plumber or they did not, they bought milk or forgot. Their life together continued in her absence. They were not dreams, they were lives, full and complete and ongoing, and she was living all of them simultaneously, experiencing them in fragments, in brief visitations, like a ghost haunting her own existence, never staying long enough to see anything through to completion. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it brought a strange calm, a clarity, a sense that the chaos finally had a shape she could understand even if she could not control it. She had been trying to understand why the dreams felt so real, why they left such deep impressions, why waking felt like violence. Now she knew. Waking was violence. It was abandonment. Every morning she was leaving people behind, leaving lives unfinished, stepping out of one existence and into another with no way to return, no way to explain, no way to choose which one was primary, which one was real. They were all real. All equally valid. All happening simultaneously. She spent days processing this, testing it, looking for evidence that would contradict it, that would prove her wrong, that would restore the comfortable certainty that dreams were just dreams and waking was reality, and the two were separate categories that did not bleed into each other. But everything confirmed it. The emotions were too specific, too consistent. The fatigue she felt some mornings corresponded exactly to physical exertion in dreams, to nights spent dancing until dawn, to days spent moving furniture or climbing stairs or running from something she could never quite see. Her muscles would be sore in ways that did not match her waking life at all, as if her body was registering experiences it had never had. The knowledge that appeared in her mind sometimes, unbidden, knowledge of things she had never learned in this life, piano music she could suddenly hear in her head note for note, recipes she had never read but could recite perfectly, the names of plants she had never studied, French verbs she had never conjugated, all of it coming from those other lives, bleeding through the permeable boundary, leaving traces like radioactive contamination. She was living in a superposition, all versions of herself existing at once, and consciousness was just her attention moving between them, a flashlight beam illuminating one life at a time while the others continued in darkness, independent, autonomous, real. She stopped going to work entirely. Just stopped showing up, stopped answering emails, stopped pretending she cared about quarterly projections and market share and the endless tedious machinery of capitalism. Stopped answering calls. Let the mail pile up by the door, bills and notices and letters she would never open. There was no point. This life, this waking life, was just one of many, and not even the best one, not even close. Why should it take precedence? Why should it be the one she prioritized? Why should she sacrifice all the other lives, all the other versions, all the other possibilities, for this one diminished existence that had failed to accumulate any meaning? She began experimenting with sleep schedules, trying to spend more time in the better lives, the ones where she felt more complete, more herself, more aligned with some ideal version she had always suspected existed but never managed to embody. She would stay awake for days in this life, drinking coffee and pacing and staring at walls, sleeping only briefly, just long enough to check in on the others, to see how they were progressing, to live a few hours in each before returning. But it did not work the way she wanted. Time in the dreams did not map cleanly to time awake. Sometimes she would sleep for an hour and live through days in a dream, whole arcs of experience condensed into minutes of REM sleep. Sometimes she would sleep for 8 hours and experience only moments, brief flashes of another life that left her frustrated and yearning for more. The math refused to cooperate. The physics of it was slippery, inconsistent, maddening, as if the universe itself was taunting her with the impossibility of control. And she was getting sick. Her body was deteriorating from lack of care, from irregular sleep, from the stress of trying to maintain all these lives at once, from the sheer metabolic cost of existing in so many places simultaneously. She was losing weight, her clothes hanging loose, her face gaunt in the mirror. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, veins visible beneath the surface like rivers on a map. Her hands shook. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a full meal. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the person staring back. This waking version, this hollow shell, this failing vessel. In one of the dreams she was healthy, vibrant, running marathons, her body strong and capable and functioning perfectly. In another she was cooking elaborate meals, feeding people, nourishing them, her kitchen full of warmth and abundance. In another she was dancing, her body strong and graceful, moving with a confidence she had never possessed in waking life. But here, in this life, she was wasting away, slowly dying from neglect, from the inability to care about something that felt increasingly irrelevant. The irony was not lost on her. The more she tried to live in the dreams, the more this waking body failed, deteriorated, approached its own ending. And yet this was the body that tethered her, the anchor she could not escape, the thing that pulled her back again and again no matter how much she wanted to stay in the other lives. She needed it functional enough to sleep, to dream, to access the other lives. Without it she would have nothing, would be nowhere, would cease to exist in any form. She forced herself to eat, to drink water, to take basic care of this version, this primary version, even though it felt increasingly like tending to a vehicle, a shell, something instrumental rather than essential, something that existed only to transport her consciousness from one life to another. And all the while the dreams continued, relentless and beautiful and cruel in their perfection. She fell in love a dozen times with people who would never exist in her waking life, who were real only in other versions, other possibilities, other timelines. She raised children who were not hers, watched them grow from infants to toddlers to children with opinions and personalities, felt the fierce protective love that comes with parenthood, the terror and joy and exhaustion of being responsible for another human life, and then woke to an empty apartment, the absence of them unbearable, A grief so profound it made the phantom She achieved things, created things, contributed to communities, made differences in lives, all of it real, all of it mattering, all of it lost every time she opened her eyes in this diminished waking world. Her waking life had become the dream, the unreal thing, the place she visited reluctantly, with resentment, the interruption rather than the main event. One night, lying in bed, waiting for sleep, she had a thought that felt both obvious and impossible. What if she just did not wake up? What if she chose one of the other lives and stayed there, committed to it, let this waking version go, let it die or fade or whatever happened to versions that were no longer inhabited? It must be possible. If her consciousness was moving between versions, then surely she could choose to stop moving, to settle, to plant herself in one life and let it be the real one, the only one, the permanent one. She thought about the woman in the kitchen with the man she loved. That life felt the most complete, the most like something she would choose if choice were offered, if the universe allowed such things. She could stay there. She could wake up in that kitchen every morning, drink coffee from that chipped blue mug, live that small quiet life with that small quiet love, and let this version, this isolated version, this version that had failed to accumulate anything meaningful, just stop, just end, just cease to be. It would be easy. All she had to do was not come back. The next night she went to bed with intention, with purpose, with something like determination. She closed her eyes and thought about that kitchen, about that man, about that life, willing herself toward it, asking whatever force or physics or cosmic accident that governed this to let her stay, to let her choose, to let her claim one life and make it permanent. She fell asleep. And she woke up in the kitchen, morning light coming through the blinds in golden slants, the man at the table reading his paper, the smell of coffee filling the small space. She felt a surge of something like victory, like relief, like coming home after a long journey. She was here. She had made it. She drank her coffee slowly, savoring every sip, talked to him about ordinary things, felt the comfortable weight of their shared history settling around her like a blanket. Hours passed. They went about their day, washing dishes, reading, talking, the comfortable silence of long familiarity. She felt herself relaxing into it, accepting it, claiming it as hers. This was her life now. This would be her only life. She would stay here, she would commit, she would let the others go. And then without warning, without choice, she felt the pull. The terrible, unstoppable pull of waking. It started as a sensation at the edge of her awareness, a tugging, a current, a force she could not name but recognized immediately with absolute dread. She tried to resist it, tried to hold on to the kitchen, to the man, to the life, gripping the edge of the table as if physical force could keep her there. But it was like trying to hold water in her hands, like trying to stop a tide, like trying to argue with gravity. Impossible, futile, doomed from the start. The world began to blur, to fade, colors bleeding into each other, sounds becoming distant and muffled. And she felt herself being dragged backward, pulled away, torn from this life and returned to the other one, the one she had tried to abandon, the one she thought she could escape. She woke up screaming. Actually screaming, her throat raw, her face wet with tears and sweat and something that might have been blood from biting her lip. Her whole body was shaking with the violence of the transition, with the trauma of being ripped from one existence and forced into another against her will. She had tried to stay and it had not worked. She was not allowed to choose. The mechanism, whatever it was, did not respect her will, her desire, her intention. She was a passenger, not a driver. Consciousness moved and she moved with it, helpless, dragged from life to life without control, without agency, a ghost in every version, permanent in none. She lay there in the dark, understanding now the full shape of her situation, the complete horror of it. She was living all these lives but she was not in control of any of them. She could not choose which one to prioritize, could not choose to stay in one and abandon the others, could not make any life permanent or primary or real in the way she wanted reality to be. She was condemned to experience them all, in fragments, in pieces, forever interrupted, forever severed from continuity, forever torn from one existence and thrust into another. She would never know the end of any of these stories, would never see how the teacher's career progressed, whether the children learned, whether she made a difference. Would never know if the painter finished that canvas, if the work was good, if anyone saw it. Would never know if the woman in the kitchen grew old with the man she loved, if they stayed together, if their love endured. She would only ever get glimpses, moments, scenes from the middle of stories that continued without her, stories she was simultaneously living and excluded from, experiencing and unable to complete. The cruelty of it was exquisite, perfectly calibrated to create maximum suffering. She was everywhere and nowhere, living fully and not living at all, present and absent, real and unreal, fractured across versions of herself that she could experience but never hold, never keep, never finish. She stopped eating again. Stopped caring for the waking body. What was the point? This version was no more real than the others, no more important, no more deserving of her attention or care. If she had to live all of them, she would live all of them badly, half present, half committed, spreading herself so thin across so many lives that none of them got enough of her to matter. None of them received the full weight of her presence. Her friends came by eventually, worried, banging on the door, calling her name through the wood, their voices distant and unimportant. She did not answer. Let them think whatever they needed to think. Let them call doctors or police or whoever people called when someone disappeared into themselves. It did not matter. Nothing in this life mattered because this life was just one of many and she was not even fully here. She was diluted, distributed, divided among versions like a single drop of ink in an ocean, visible nowhere, present everywhere, significant in no single place. She lay in bed and waited for sleep, for the next transition, for the next life. And when sleep came, she found herself in a new place, a life she had never visited before. She was standing in a hospital room, wearing scrubs that felt familiar on her body, a stethoscope around her neck that she somehow knew how to use. She was a doctor, apparently, in this version. She looked down at a chart in her hands, patient information she somehow understood despite never having studied medicine, medical terminology that made immediate sense, treatment plans that appeared in her mind fully formed. She walked through the hospital, attending to patients, making decisions, saving lives maybe, or at least trying to, and the confidence with which she moved, the competence, the sense of purpose, it was overwhelming. This version of her was important, necessary. People depended on her. Their lives were in her hands and she knew what to do, knew how to help, knew how to make things better. And then she woke up, back in her apartment, useless, purposeless, a person who sold words to sell products, a person whose absence from the world would leave no gap, no hole, no space that needed filling. She understood then what she had been avoiding understanding, the truth she had been circling around but refusing to name. This life, this waking life, was the worst one. All the other versions were better, more complete, more meaningful, more worthy of existence. This was the life she had failed to cultivate, failed to develop, failed to fill with anything substantial or significant. And she was trapped in it, forced to return to it again and again, forced to wake into this diminished version while all the better versions continued without her full presence, without her commitment, ghosts of lives she could have lived if she had been allowed to choose, if the universe permitted such agency. The depression that settled over her then was total, absolute, a black hole from which no light could escape. It was not sadness, it was the absence of anything, a void, a blank space where feeling should be. She stopped getting out of bed even when awake. Stopped distinguishing between sleeping and waking. Let the days blur together, let the transitions happen without resistance, without attention, without any attempt to maintain the boundary between states. She was a body in a bed, cycling through lives, experiencing none of them fully, present in none of them really, a fragmentary consciousness too divided to cohere into anything resembling a person. Time passed, she was not sure how much, had lost the ability to track it, to care about it. The dreams continued, relentless, beautiful, cruel in their perfection. She lived and lived and lived, in so many ways, so many versions, and none of it accumulated into anything she could keep, anything permanent, anything real. One day or night or some moment between, she had another realization, the final one, the one that would determine everything. The dreams would never stop. She would keep experiencing these lives forever, or until her waking body failed, whichever came first. There was no resolution, no ending, no point at which the story would conclude and she would understand what it meant, what it had been for. This was just existence now, fractured and perpetual and unbearable. Unless she made a choice, the only choice available to her, the only form of agency the universe seemed willing to grant. She could let the waking body die. It was dying anyway, slowly, from neglect, from her refusal to care for it, from the metabolic impossibility of maintaining so many lives at once. She could help it along, could stop drinking water, stop eating entirely, could let this version, this primary version, this anchor version simply cease, simply end. And then what? Would consciousness continue in the other lives, freed from this failing body, this diminished existence, this anchor that kept pulling her back? Would she finally be allowed to stay in one of them, to commit, to live a single life fully instead of all lives partially? Or would she cease entirely, all versions blinking out at once, the whole superposition collapsing into nothing, consciousness extinguished across all dimensions? She did not know. There was no way to know without trying. And trying meant dying, or letting die, or allowing death, however you wanted to phrase it. The semantics did not change the reality of what she was contemplating. She thought about it for a long time, or what felt like a long time, though time had become unreliable, elastic, measured differently in each life, in each version, impossible to track or trust. She thought about the woman in the kitchen, about the doctor in the hospital, about the teacher and the painter and the runner and all the others, all the versions of herself that seemed more real than this one, more complete, more worth sustaining, more deserving of continuation. She thought about what it would mean to let them continue without this anchor, without this primary version dragging her back, interrupting, severing, preventing any single life from being lived fully. And she realized, with a clarity that felt almost like peace, like acceptance, like surrender, that she had already made the choice. Had made it days or weeks ago when she stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped caring whether this body survived. She had been killing it slowly, unconsciously, and now she was simply becoming conscious of the process, claiming it, owning it, taking responsibility for what she had already set in motion. This was her only power, the only agency she had, the only choice that was actually hers to make. She could choose to stop waking up. Not by staying in a dream, that did not work, she had tried, the universe would not allow it. But by making waking impossible, by eliminating the body that waking happened to, by removing the anchor that consciousness kept returning to. She closed her eyes, not to sleep but just to close them, just to rest, to feel the weight of her eyelids, the darkness behind them. Her body was so tired, so depleted, running on reserves that were nearly exhausted. It would not take much more. A few more days without water, without food, and the whole thing would shut down, the engine would stop, the tether would break, the anchor would dissolve. And then she would find out what happened next, whether consciousness continued in the other versions or whether it all ended, whether she would finally be allowed to stay in one life or whether she would simply stop, all of her, every version, extinguished like a candle in the wind. She did not know which outcome she hoped for. Both seemed better than this endless fragmentation, this perpetual severance, this hell of partial existence. Either continuity or cessation, either a single life or no life. But not this fractured half-existence in too many places at once, this ghost life that was neither here nor there, neither fully present nor fully absent. She waited, patient now, calm, all the fear and confusion burned away, leaving only a quiet certainty that this was the only way forward, the only choice that was actually a choice, the only action she could take that belonged entirely to her, that no force or mechanism or cosmic indifference could take away. Around her the apartment was silent, still, full of shadows and dust and the accumulated detritus of a life abandoned. The world continued, indifferent to her decision, to her crisis, to her slow dissolution. Outside people were living single lives, waking and sleeping in clear cycles, experiencing one version of themselves continuously, accumulating memories and relationships and meaning in a single coherent stream. They did not know how lucky they were. They did not know that existence could fragment, could split, could spread itself across versions until there was nothing left in any one place. No center, no core, no self that persisted. She knew now. She had learned it the hard way, by experiencing it, by living it, by becoming it. And now she would end it, or transform it, or discover what came next. She let her eyes close and felt sleep approaching, the familiar pull of transition, the movement of consciousness from this life to another. And this time she welcomed it, not with resistance or resentment but with something like gratitude, like relief, like a prisoner welcoming the end of a sentence. Soon this body would be too weak to pull her back, too depleted to demand her return, too far gone to serve as an anchor. Soon the waking would stop and she would remain in the dreams, in the other lives, permanently, or she would stop entirely. Consciousness extinguished across all versions. Either way the fragmentation would end. Either way she would be free of this terrible splitting, this perpetual abandonment, this hell of partial existence. She felt herself slipping away, felt the boundaries dissolving, felt the transition beginning, consciousness moving like water from one container to another. And her last thought, her final thought in this life, in this version, was a question she would never have answered, a wondering that would remain forever unresolved, hanging in the air like smoke. When she stopped waking up in this life, would the other versions know? Would the woman in the kitchen feel a sudden absence, a grief without a source, tears on her face with no memory of why, a loss she could not name or explain? Would the doctor in the hospital feel inexplicably tired, as if she had lost something vital, something essential, a part of herself gone missing. Would all of them carry a phantom mourning for a version of themselves that had ceased to exist? A life they had been living in parallel that had suddenly, without explanation, without warning, ended. Would they wake up, those other versions, with a feeling they could not name, a loss they could not explain, a part of themselves missing that they had never known was there, an amputation they could not locate but could definitely feel? She would never know. She was giving up the right to know, was surrendering all claims to resolution, to understanding, to conclusion, to the comfort of knowing how the story ends. This was the price of escape, the cost of ending the fragmentation, the sacrifice required to stop being everywhere and nowhere at once. She would never know how any of these stories ended, including her own, including the one happening right now in this bed, in this apartment, in this life that was about to cease being primary, cease being the anchor, cease being anything at all. The darkness came, gentle and complete, and she let it take her, let it pull her away from this life and into another, and then another, cycling through versions, through lives, through selves, each one a little more distant, a little less tethered, consciousness spreading thinner and thinner across an expanding universe of possibilities until finally, quietly, without ceremony or significance, without drama or declaration, the tether broke entirely and she was gone. Not from one life but from the one life that had been demanding her return, the anchor that had been pulling her back, the primary version that was primary no more. And in the apartment the body remained, still and silent, no longer breathing, no longer pulling consciousness back to itself, no longer waking, no longer demanding anything. And somewhere, in versions she could no longer reach, in lives that continued without her, women who looked like her woke with tears they could not explain, with grief for someone they had never met, with a profound inexplicable loss that would follow them quietly for the rest of their lives, a phantom mourning for a version of themselves they did not know had died, a sister consciousness that had ceased to exist, leaving only an echo, a trace, a feeling of wrongness they would carry forever, without understanding why.